He was an old man who had lived long enough to believe that love was something meant only for the past, a chapter already written and gently closed. His name was Harland, and the lines on his face were not only marks of age but records of a life filled with work, responsibility, and quiet sacrifice. He lived alone in a small house at the edge of town, a place that once held laughter, arguments, shared meals, and promises that time eventually dissolved. His wife had passed away many years ago, and with her went the rhythm of companionship he had never learned to replace. Since then, his days followed a predictable pattern, waking before sunrise, preparing simple meals, tending to small chores, and sitting for long hours with his thoughts. The town knew him as polite, reserved, and distant, a man who nodded kindly but rarely invited conversation, as though he had already said everything life required of him. She was a young woman named Eliza, standing at the uncertain beginning of adulthood, where the future feels both exciting and terrifying. She had grown up surrounded by noise, expectations, and constant pressure to succeed, to become someone impressive before she even understood who she was. Her family loved her, but their love came with rules and conditions, and over time she began to feel as though her life was being shaped by everyone else's plans. She moved to the town seeking space rather than adventure, hoping the quiet would help her breathe and listen to herself again. She rented a small room above a closed cafe and found work at a nearby bookstore, a place filled with dust, slow hours, and stories waiting patiently to be opened. Their paths crossed on an ordinary afternoon that neither of them would have thought important at the time. Harland entered the bookstore looking for a novel he had once read decades earlier, more out of nostalgia than interest. Eliza noticed him struggling to read the small print on a shelf label and offered help without hesitation. Their exchange was brief, polite, almost forgettable, yet something about it lingered. Harland felt an unfamiliar warmth, a sense that he had been spoken to rather than spoken at, while Eliza felt oddly calm, as if she had stepped into a conversation that required no effort or defense. When he left, they both carried the feeling that something gentle had passed between them. Harland began returning to the bookstore more often, sometimes buying books, sometimes only browsing, sometimes simply sitting and reading while Eliza worked nearby. Their conversations grew naturally, unforced and unhurried. He spoke about his youth, his work, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he learned too late. Eliza listened with genuine interest, not as someone being taught, but as someone discovering another human being in full. She shared her own doubts, her fears of choosing the wrong path, and her exhaustion from trying to live up to expectations that felt heavy and unclear. With Harland, she did not feel rushed to decide who she was meant to be. With Eliza, Harland did not feel like a relic of the past. As weeks turned into months, their connection deepened into something steady and meaningful. They walked together through quiet streets, sat on park benches watching the world move around them, and shared meals filled with conversation and comfortable silence. Harland found himself smiling more, noticing details he had long ignored, like the way sunlight changed throughout the day or how laughter felt when it arrived unexpectedly. Eliza felt grounded, as though she had found a place where her thoughts could rest without judgment. Neither spoke of love, but both felt its presence growing quietly between them, like a truth waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. The town noticed, as towns always do. People whispered and stared, their curiosity turning into judgment as assumptions formed. Friends asked questions disguised as concern, and strangers allowed their disapproval to linger in their expressions. Eliza became aware of how easily the world reduced her to labels, how quickly her choices were questioned once they stepped outside expectations. Harland felt the weight of those looks deeply, carrying guilt alongside affection. He worried about what loving him might cost her, about the future she might sacrifice by choosing someone the world deemed unsuitable. The tension between them grew not from a lack of love, but from an excess of fear. Harland began pulling back, offering fewer invitations, shorter conversations, convincing himself that distance was an act of kindness. Eliza noticed the change immediately, confusion turning into pain as she struggled to understand why something so real suddenly felt fragile. When she confronted him, Harland confessed his fears honestly, telling her he loved her too deeply to be the reason she was held back. His words were gentle, but they struck her like rejection, reopening wounds she had carried long before she met him. Their separation was quiet but devastating. Days passed without conversation, and both returned to lives that felt emptier than before. Harland's house grew colder, his routines heavier, each hour echoing with unspoken words. Eliza tried to immerse herself in work and future plans, but everything felt hollow without the connection she had found. She questioned whether love was always meant to be surrendered for the sake of comfort and approval, whether choosing herself meant denying what her heart knew to be true. In the stillness of his home, Harland wrote her a letter, pouring into it everything he had been too afraid to say aloud. He wrote of how she had reminded him that life was still capable of surprise, that love did not expire with age, and that meeting her had given meaning to years he once believed were only meant to be endured. He did not ask her to return or promise a future he could not guarantee. He simply thanked her for seeing him and for allowing him, even briefly, to feel alive again. Eliza found the letter waiting for her at the bookstore, left quietly with instructions to give it to her if she ever asked about him. She read it slowly, tears blurring the words as she realized that love did not always demand certainty or permanence to be real. It demanded honesty and courage. That evening, she went to Harland's house, standing at the door with a heart pounding not with fear, but with clarity. When Harland opened the door and saw her standing there, time seemed to pause. They spoke openly, without defenses or excuses, acknowledging the risks and the uncertainty that lay ahead. They did not promise forever, nor did they pretend the world would suddenly understand. They chose instead to honor what they felt, to walk forward without denying the truth of their connection. Their relationship did not silence the whispers or erase the challenges. There were difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and times when the weight of judgment pressed heavily against them. Yet within their shared space, there was peace. Harland learned to accept joy without questioning whether he deserved it, and Eliza learned that choosing love did not mean abandoning her future, but shaping it with intention. As years passed, their lives continued to change. Eliza grew into her ambitions with confidence rooted in self-knowledge, while Harland aged with grace, carrying the warmth of companionship rather than the ache of loneliness. Their story was not extraordinary because it defied age, but because it honored connection in a world quick to dismiss it. It was a reminder that love does not follow timelines or rules imposed by others, and that sometimes the most meaningful relationships arrive when we least expect them, asking only that we be brave enough to accept them.